So good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are, and thank you for joining us at this Global Investigative Journalism Network webinar, which is about how Africa connects to your story, investigating multinational misconduct, natural resource exploitation, and impunity beyond borders. My name is Dinesh Balia, and I'm the director of the Wits Centre for Journalism in Johannesburg, South Africa, hosts of the annual African Investigative Journalism Conference. Today's webinar is part of GIJN's week-long focus on the African continent, intended to shine a light on some of the continent's strongest investigative reporters, some best practices, and to highlight the vast differences in social contexts between countries on this continent. More than ever before, investigative stories develop reporting strands which land far away from their points of origin. A probe into the killing at a mine in the DRC, for example, can lead to the London headquarters of one of the world's leading diamond companies. An investigation into corruption in Liberia could lead to a law firm or a finance company in Central America. Similarly, a story on wildlife trafficking in Asia can trace its origins to South Africa. Consequently, watchdog journalists often need a helping hand to complete investigations by accessing information from parts of the world that they cannot easily access. They also need access to networks to help extend the reach of investigations to a wider audience, extending its impact. In Africa, more than in most parts of the world, the hurdles of reporting beyond one's own country and continent are numerous, ranging from financial barriers, visa restrictions, and tech challenges. Foreign reporters also face unique challenges in Africa that local journalists have the skills and expertise to circumvent or mitigate. Collaborative investigative journalism is therefore growing in importance as a mutually beneficial tool for reporters and newsrooms keen to tell stories in or about Africa. In today's webinar, we hear from some African journalists, some people I know across the continent, who have done some impactful collaborative investigations. They will help us to understand how to connect the dots between Africa and your next watchdog story, whether you're on this continent or beyond it. I'm delighted to introduce our panel of speakers. Please allow me firstly to introduce Grace Ekpu, a documentary photographer and filmmaker from Nigeria, formerly a news producer at TVC News Africa and a senior journalist with the BBC. In 2022, she joined the Associated Press's Global Investigations Unit, covering oceans and fisheries with her visual expertise. Cynthia Guchiri is a reporter and producer with Africa Uncensored, a leading public interest investigative journalism company. During a career in which her work has been recognized a number of times, she has participated in several local and international collaborations and projects. Madeleine Nguga from Cameroon is the Africa editor for the Pulitzer Center, which funds independent reporting on underreported systemic issues around the world, including in and about Africa. And finally, Mika Reddy from South Africa is the Africa coordinator for the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, otherwise known as ICIJ, which has partnered with several centers for investigative journalism and media houses in Africa for groundbreaking watchdog reporting. Before we start, just a little bit of housekeeping, a little bit of information about the Global Investigative Journalism Network. I'm sure most of you are aware of who they are, but for those of you not familiar with it, GIJN is the largest network of nonprofit investigative journalism organizations with 251 member organizations in 95 countries. But it works with journalists everywhere, whether you're a member organization or not, in nonprofits, in commercial organizations, and with freelancers who are becoming more of the bigger pocket of journalists around the world. It has an extensive range of resources and tip sheets to help journalists worldwide, and you can find these on gijn.org. I'd also like to remind our audience that we have live interpretation from English to French, which is quite cool. I can't say that in French. I wish I could. But if you want to, please use the service by clicking on the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen and select the language that you prefer. We also want to hear from you in the audience, and I see there are close to 93 of us at this point. Please send written questions and messages in the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can later on. I'll be joined by my colleague, GIJN's Benon Aluka, who will help me moderate the questions, and we'll try and fit as many in as possible. And finally, if you're not able to stay for the entire session or you want to refer to it later, we'll be recording the session and making it available via YouTube, so you have access to the recording. So let's kick off. We'll start with Grace. And Grace, if you could share your presentation with us, and I'll come back to move on after you're done. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you so much for the introduction. My name is Grace Ekbu. It's great to I feel privileged to be speaking with you all on natural resource exploitation, connecting the dots, and I'll be looking at a story on flags of convenience using the Cameroon example. My name is Grace Ekbu. I'm an investigative journalist with the Associated Press. We are a news agency dedicated to factual reporting. No organization in the world does more to advance the power of facts than we do. This slide shows the story as we published it. Cameroon becomes the go-to country for foreign fishing vessels. It was a text piece and also video, which I was very much part of. And it was a collaborative effort with my colleague Risha and a host of other AP colleagues in different countries. There's a link to this in the presentation, so you can look at the story and also watch the visuals at your convenience. Now, flags of convenience, just explaining what that is. A flag of convenience ship is one that flies the flag of a country other than its country of ownership, and that's for a lot of benefits. The flag state is responsible for enforcing fishing restrictions and inspections, regardless of where the ship sails. Now, our focus was to look at Cameroon being a country that's, having a rapid adoption of other countries, other ships flying its flag. Basically, in 2021, there was an EU yellow card issued on the country, which was a warning on the activities of other vessels adopting the country's flag, and that sparked our interest. In 2018, there were 14 vessels in Cameroon, while in 2022, their industrial fishing fleet rose to about 129, which is over 900% increase. And what's the catch, you may ask? First, there's always minimal regulation, cheap registration fees for these vessel owners, low or no taxes, freedom to employ cheap labor, and access to more shipping ports. What did we find in this investigation? We found the rapid growth of ships, basically from 14 to 129. And all of the EU-linked vessels registered to Cameroon did not operate in the country's waters. With tracking data, we're able to find out that the ships journeyed between ports in Africa, in Mauritania, Angola, South Africa, and Namibia. Now, 14 of these vessels were owned and managed by companies based in EU member states like Belgium, Malta, Latvia, Cyprus, with no genuine ties to Cameroon. We also found limited resources and weak oversight on the part of fisheries authorities in Cameroon. The budget dropped 32% since 2019. And during our field reporting, found a growing population of foreign-owned vessels competing with local fishermen for their very little catch. What were the challenges in this investigation? Interview requests were not granted both with the government and EU companies, and there was limited access to confidential shipping records. And also on the ground in Cameroon, there was a lot of monitoring from Cameroonian fisheries authorities there. Now, what were the research tools that we used? First, in data collection, we used marine traffic. Marine traffic is pretty expensive. You use it to track ships worldwide, identifying their location and suspicious activities using AIS data, that's automatic identification systems. And that's may not be accessible to everyone, but that was a very useful tool that we used in this investigation. We also used the IHS Maritime Database, Global Fishing Watch. This one is open access, and you basically get satellite information to detect, phishing activities in real time. That's really useful for our work. And also Lloyd's List Intelligence is subscribed, quite, they cost thousands of dollars, but they're very useful tools that we used during this investigation. We're able to access budgets and registry documents for, violations, and access reports from organizations like Greenpeace, and also went to the field in Cameroon to interview fishermen and get more information that we needed. In this slide, I share like the uses of these tools that you can look at in your free time, like marine traffic, Global Fishing Watch, Google Earth, which is very useful in leveraging satellite imagery to visualize environmental changes, which could be useful for, detecting deforestation, overfished regions, and, marine degradation. Also have the global database of IU fishing FAO there. Some of these are subscribed on some open access. And this slide just showed marine traffic, how we were able to track one of the EU-linked vessels in this investigation that was flagged to Cameroon, called the Pilot Whale, and we're able to track where the expected time of arrival and what port this vessel was going to, and then also use the IMO to find the vessels, the ownership of the vessel, when it last changed its name, and just reflagging activities were all visible with these tools that we used in this investigation. And impact of the story, at the time that we worked on the story, the EU Commission issued Cameroon a yellow card, and after 6 months, they got a red card, which entails sanctions, ban on fisheries products, in the EU. And that's still in effect up until today. And we also did a follow-up story that I linked in the slides as well on this. And then there's been a growing call for reforms in ship registration, the processes, and stronger enforcement by flag states. And yeah, that brings me to the end of my presentation. And thank you for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions after this. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Grace. We're going to move on to the next presentation, and I'm hoping that everyone keeps all their questions to the end so that we can have a group discussion later on. I hope that's okay. Let's move on to Cynthia, if you're ready for us. Thanks, Cynthia.
Yeah, thank you also for uploading my presentation. So in April this year, I was assigned a story in collaboration with Lighthouse Reports and several other global media outlets like Le Monde. We have Guardian, The Continent, New Humanitarian, the New Lead News, and ABC News, among other media houses in Australia and India. And this assignment was to investigate PR firm, which basically focuses on the agro industry and its involvement into a secret network that has been spying on African and other anti-GMO and anti-pesticide activists. So this culminated into the production of a documentary for Africa Uncensored, because we are we mainly disseminate our programs and stories on YouTube. So for us, it was a documentary, while the other collaborators worked on articles, and the title of our documentary and the other articles was Poison PR. So we were looking into a reputation management firm called Vifluence, which is alleged to have been working for 20 years together with agrochemical giant called Syngenta to suppress information about one particular herbicide called gramoxone, and whose main ingredient is paraquat, which is a harmful ingredient that has been scientifically proven to cause Parkinson's disease. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Yes, so basically this is just a brief description of Poison PR, and just to add that Vifluence was also alleged to have run campaigns with Syngenta for 20 years that promoted the use of paraquat, and this also in consideration of besides the proven impacts on human health, there's also the issue about sponsoring other articles that led to the misinformation about the use of the pesticides in Africa especially. Please, let's move to the next slide. So what are the databases we used? With collaborators like Lighthouse Reports, they did the work of tracking US government spending to find the USAID contracts, because USAID is actually one of the government agencies that had subcontracted Vifluence to push the sale of, to push the narrative on GM crops and even pesticide use in Africa. There were also court records that were assessed through pesa.com, and this is of cases of in the USA where Syngenta is accused alongside Vifluence for concealing information about the impact of paraquat on human health. We also used usaspending.gov to show how Vifluence got funding from an institute called International Food Policy Research Institute, which also contained statements of work. There was also an open link on one of the newsletters that led us to a secret or a members-only website called Bonus Eventers. And this website is made up of Vifluence alongside individuals, experts, scientists, and even agrochemical companies who are pro-pesticides and pro-GMO. And here, using this link, we discovered that some activists who are actually on the front line to campaign against the use of harmful pesticides in Africa and especially in Kenya, like one miner of an organization called Biba Kenya, and also there's another organization under under Henrik Ball Foundation called Root to Foot Foundation. We also found them profiled. In some cases, the profiles were even more elaborate as to about they were detailing things like someone's physical address, what they do, their family, and such kind of information. The other databases and documents we were able to use and tools were like Wayback Machine. We also accessed a petition that was presented to the Kenya Parliament in 2019 and 2020 by Miners, Biba Kenya, Root to Food, alongside two other organizations. We had also minutes of meetings that were sponsored by Vifluence and the BE network. And also when it came to the RORs, we accessed other conventions as annexes like the Rotterdam Conventions. And we used this especially to just debunk some of the claims that we were receiving from government agencies responsible for the regulation of these pesticides in Kenya. Next slide, please. So given that these documents, most of them were coming from the USA, how now does this story become relevant to Kenya? Kenya has been in a protracted battle against the use of harmful pesticides. According to scientists and the petition that was tabled in Parliament, there were 4 categories of ingredients that were being are supposed to be banned. One of them is some ingredients have been proven to be carcinogenic in nature. Others are neurotoxic, and there are some that are endocrine disruptors, and we also have some that are mutagenic. And Root to Food released a report later in 2023 that showed the scale of harmful pesticides in Kenya, whereby 76% of harmful of the pesticide used in Kenya are actually hazardous and harmful, and 44% of these pesticides actually come from Europe and the USA, and they have been banned there in these countries or in this region. So there are concerns about the rising cases of diseases like cancer, believed to be caused by some of these pesticides. But now the focus on paraquat, which is widely used as a preferred herbicide during planting, is that it has been proven to cause Parkinson's disease. So here comes this initiative by 4 organizations to file a petition in the 12th Parliament. That was in the year 2019. And in 2020, the 12th Parliament adopted a report that recommended the withdrawal of these pesticides with these harmful ingredients, which also include paraquat. But the sad thing is that one election later, and right now, Kenya is embroiled in another election campaign for 2027. PCPB, or the Pest Control and Produce Board, has not implemented this recommendation fully, and has actually been working with CropLife Kenya, which is a branch of one of the members of the BE website, CropLife International. And there's something under something called the public-private partnership, which many Kenyans fear that this is usually an avenue for corruption and wrongdoings. Let's go to the next slide. So how did we approach our sources? For cases where we had to involve the activities going on in the USA, for example, we had someone conduct an interview with a lawyer called David Dickens, who is actually leading a class action suit against Syngenta and Vifluence. So that interview was conducted by one of our collaborators. But here in Kenya, I was tasked with looking for farmers who actually key to the story, and as they are the most impacted. And some of these farmers have been using these pesticides and have had even a history of, without even having a history of Parkinson's disease or having undergone other issues or eventualities in life that would have led them to having this disease. We found one farmer who actually had the disease. Unfortunately, he passed on just a day before I went to interview him. We had actually reached his county, far off from Nairobi, just close to the border with Uganda. And the following day, he fell sick. He got a heart attack, and unfortunately he passed away. We also interviewed, apart from farmers, we spoke to flower farm workers. Kenya is very big on flower farming and horticulture. And some of these workers have been employed to spray these chemicals on the farms. And so we found 2 who actually have Parkinson's disease, and they do not have a history of the disease in their family. So those were the ones we were able to interview. They showed a danger of a government's lack of responsibility in providing essential extension services and leaving this role to the agrochemical industry, which is profit-oriented. There's a narrative that is being used right now in Kenya called the conservation agriculture, and this is where farmers are largely encouraged to use pesticides. So Root to Food Initiative and Ann Maina were also key characters in our story. They have been profiled in the Bonus Eventers website for their activism against pesticides, and they also offered insights on their work and the challenges they face, even in trying to push for the adoption of this report that by now would have led to the ban of these pesticides. We interviewed a lawyer also who is taking up the matter in court in Kenya, just to show the efforts between Kenya and the USA in terms of bringing justice for the victims of this herbicide. Another person that was really key to our story is Gladys Boss. She's a member of parliament. She's a women representative for Uasin Gishu County and also the deputy speaker, and she's the one who tabled the report in parliament. And among the parliamentarians we have from the 12th and 13th parliament, she has been the most vocal about the issue of pesticides in Kenya. We sought rights of reply from PCPB to interrogate their role in implementing the ban on harmful pesticides and their relationship with CropLife Kenya, which is seen as an impediment to effecting this ban. Next slide, please. So some of the lessons we have learned as Africa Uncensored and myself, this is the second investigative I have done in my career as a journalist, and both investigatives have touched on agriculture. The first was an expose on fake fertilizer, but my key, my key learning points in the story that I did with Poison PR is that we really need, as journalists, to take seriously the role of informing and educating our audiences on consumer rights, because Africa is where it's someone in the story mentioned that Africa is a dumping site for toxic products, and we owe this to our future generations. So as journalists, we should not be scared to take on these complex stories and break them down in simple language that our audiences can understand, so that we can be able to safeguard their rights and even their health. Another thing is that agriculture is an underreported sector, and this is despite its crucial role in our society. So we need to interrogate and investigate the various bills and policies being implemented by our governments. Just to quickly mention, in Kenya, that agriculture has been devolved, meaning that it is no longer the responsibility of the central government. So what this has done is that it has being a devolved function, which is now under the county government. It does not get the priority it deserves, meaning that sometimes county governments will focus most of their budgets on wage bill and forget to employ extension workers whose work is to help farmers and to provide them with the necessary guidance in their work. So what this means is that farmers have been left in the hand of agrochemical companies, and because they're interested in profit, you'll find them pushing harmful chemicals to for them to buy and use. There is also need for in-country collaborations on critical issues facing the agriculture sector and consumer issues in general, as this will help in agenda setting and ensuring Africans enjoy quality and safe products. In Kenya, for example, when we were publishing Poison PR, it coincided with a debate on the impeachment of our deputy president, of the former deputy president. So what this even meant for the story is that where we were maybe looking forward to working with other media houses and them being, them being those that propagate, or sorry, those that deliver news bulletins on a daily basis, it became difficult to work together, because now this was an issue of, prominence that they wanted to capitalize on. So it meant that the story moved a bit slower than the fertilizer story. I think I have come to the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. It's really hard to listen to these stories without getting really, really angry about them, but I'm hoping that we can press on a little bit more about these things later. So let's move on to Madeleine. Madeleine, are you ready for us? Thanks, Cynthia.
All right. Okay, all right. Can you see my screen now?
Perfect, thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm so delighted to be able to share here our work with all the journalists here. So I would like to present on this story that we have worked on in 2022, from 2022 to 2023. So before joining the Pulitzer Center, I had a chance to be one of the Rainforest Investigation Network fellow, covering stories on agribusiness impact in the Congo Basin and also illegal logging activity from the Congo Basin to the international market. So in 2022, while doing my second years of fellowship, I work on the collaboration with a colleague journalist called Josiane Quager, working from Le Monde. So we joined the network together as fellow, and we realized that we were working on the same global topic about timber trafficking. And in Cameroon, where we were investigating, the context is really hard. These are critical topics because sometimes people behind the trafficking are people with power, people doing strong business. So when investigating this kind of topic, one of the most important thing is to have your backup or how to collaborate with others. So realizing how critical and how dangerous was the topic, we thought it would be really important for us to collaborate and be strong together. So the investigation revealed how many companies involved in the logging activities in Cameroon are also part of also doing illegal activities, but from years to years, they are still receiving logging permit from the government to continue to do their activities. So the collaboration led to 7 investigative stories and were published by Info Congo and Le Monde. So the 2 organizations joined the forces. I was working for Info Congo while Josiane was working for Le Monde. And we also had this network of editor at the Rainforest Investigation Network, the Pulitzer Center Initiative. So that's, I think, one of the main highlight for me is like, for this kind of critical topic, the collaboration is the most. So with 2 female journalists from different outlets, global and regional media outlets, and that's strong support from the editorial network that we were part of. So how did we go for the investigation? We started by like research, like for all kind of investigation, we will start by research. But what was most complicated and challenging is that for illegal logging activities in Cameroon, you will rarely find documents showing that, okay, this person, this company or this person have been involved in illegal activities in the past. And most of the document will be scanned document. That was one of the first challenge. As you can see here, this is one example of the scanned document, the high number of scanned document that we collected. And these are the documents that we have been collecting for many years. So knowing that, okay, today you are doing an investigation, you have this information, this document you keep on your laptop. Next year, so we gather a lot of document like this, showing wrongdoing in logging sector in Cameroon. So this document, for example, is what we call in French sommier des infractions. So it's an official document from the Ministry of Forest, listing the name of people who have committed illegal activities related to logging or real life trafficking in Cameroon. So normally the government should publish the document like quarterly per year, but usually you will not get this document. So we collect this document from NGOs, from civil society, from experts, and we're able to have 6-year document reporting which company were involved in this. And with this scanned document, the first thing is to know how to put it in a format that you can be able to extract information. So we had to use some tools or also do manually try to scrape all the information to have our own database that we can really analyze. So apart from this scan document highlighting the main people involved in illegal activities, we wanted to know where the illegal activities were going on. We had some sources telling us that, okay, so it's in the South region, it's in the East region. For the East region, many outlets have reported about illegal logging in the East region of Cameroon. And we had other sources who know more what was going on in the South region, and it was underreported. We wanted to know if we have a correlation between illegal activities and forest loss or tree cover forest change in the country, because Cameroon is like one of the second largest country of the Congo Basin in terms of forest cover. So we wanted to know how this affect the cover change. And for that purpose, we use the open data platform called Global Forest Watch, where you are able to locate a specific area, or you can upload the shapefile to analyze a specific area to see some change happening in the forest cover. Like you can see the pink mark there showed some changes on forest. With this, you have like some sense or some sign that there's something going on within this specific forest. And what was good is that we were looking at many companies that were listed in the document I showed previously. And most of those companies have been working in this specific region and were accused of cutting timber out of the area that the government gave them. So we wanted to cross-reference and see if there is something we can get from it as information. We also use the Cameroon Forest Atlas. I would say that it's like more detailed than the Global Forest Watch. There you can see which company received a permit in a specific year, the size of the forest the permit is covering, and for how many years he should be working. So we combine all this data to be able to analyze and show that the company who received the timber permit on the last 10 years were also the one involved in illegal activity based on the official document that we were able to scrape and analyze. So you can see here that many companies sanctioned with illegal activities are still receiving small-scale logging title. Another thing that was really interesting is that normally in Cameroon is one of the the rainforest country, and it's in agreement with European Union in an agreement called VPA Flex. Is like a partnership where the country put in place a lot of measures to trace the timber from the forest to the port and the international market to make sure that timber coming from Cameroon is coming from legal sources. And the country received some support to put in place those traceability system, the traceability system. And in the year we are doing the investigation, through our research, we realized that, and through the talk with experts, interview with experts, we realized that there were a lot of problem of traceability. The government were not able to trace the timber from the forest to the international market. We talked with driver who explained how they usually move illegal timber from the forest to the city and the city to the port. So we had a lot of testimony like this to be able to build a strong story. So in terms of a few takeaway, is that the collaboration within the team. So it was not just me or just Josiane, it was a whole team of different journalists or different expertise, people with different expertise. We had data analysts, we have photographer, we have illustrator, like you can see here in one of the illustration. We talked with a lot of people in the community on the ground who were part of the illegal activities, who told us how they launder the timber, how they show the good timber to cut to the illegal activities, to the illegal company, and so on. So they explained to us how the trafficking work. And at the end, we were a bit, like, I would say a bit confused because we didn't know, should we put the sources on the ground who told us all this critical information, should we expose them, or should we find a way to protect them? At the end, we decided that we will not show the pictures of the communities who were involved in the timber trafficking, and we use illustration to make sure that, okay, we will tell the story with good visual that can help the reader to understand what is happening, but we will not expose the community, because in the community, many people were involved in the practice, not because they want to be involved, but because they lack facilities, they lack hospital, there are no road, no electricity. So they were like forced to deal with illegal logger. That's why they are involved in this illegal activity. And we prefer to use visual, like illustration, to show, to explain, to tell the story to a wider audience. So for us, the safety is not just the safety of the journalists for this kind of topic, it's also the safety of our sources. What are the measures that we can take to protect also our sources and make sure we can continue to tell our stories. And we also emphasize on the promotion. We also plan the promotion at the rainforest investigation team. Usually when you are doing investigation, where you come to the publication stage, the whole team will be there to talk with you, to talk with the editor, and to see how we can plan, because just publishing is not enough. We also have to make sure that the story reaches a wider audience, and planning ahead of time the promotion aspect also really helped to amplify the impact of the story, or the reach of the story. The cross-publication was also something that really helped us because the story were published by Info Congo at the regional level in the Congo Basin in Africa, and at the international level by Le Monde Afrique, which is a French-based outlet, part of the European Union, who signed agreement with Cameroon on VPA flag. So they were they were also interested to know more what is going on in Cameroon. So they also published the story. But after the publication, one of the outlet that is well listened in the Francophone African region, RFI, did a podcast to highlight the main finding of the investigation. And just like 5 days after the publication of the series, the Ministry of Forest reacted in Cameroon, saying that there are a lot of cases of illegal logging being transported from the forest to the city and the international market, and they recommend that his representative to reinforce the control so that we don't have this kind of figures anymore. And for us, it's an impact of what we have been doing, but it's an impact of the collaboration. All the work behind the story was just because of collaboration that we were able to have such impact. So thank you so much. Just to let you know that there is the RAIN application. So for those who are interested, don't hesitate to apply. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Madeleine. We're going to move on to Micah. Just before we do that, please can I remind everyone that we have a Q&A box for your questions. I see there's lots of questions in the chat box, but please can you move those to the Q&A box so that we can find it quickly. Thank you so much, Mika, if we're ready for you.
Thanks, Dinesh. Let me just share my screen. Can you all see that? Okay.
Perfect.
So I will take you on a warp speed tour of the Swazi secrets investigation. I'm mindful of time. So just to give you some background, when I arrived at ICIJ about a year and a half ago now, this project was sitting in my inbox. What it is an investigation based on a leak of nearly 900,000 records from the Eswatini Financial Intelligence Unit. Now, this leak was obtained by Distributed Denial of Secrets, which is a whistleblower nonprofit, a site dedicated to basically publishing and archiving leaks. And ICIJ got hold of the leaks through Distributed Denial of Secrets. They shared the leaks with us, and we then set about doing what ICIJ does best, which is to coordinate an investigation. So we started looking through the leaks, trying to identify leads, looking for prominent names, prominent individuals and entities, and sort of looking for potential stories based on big names and stories that were already out there, and sort of going with our intuition, but then also looking at it more systematically. So our data team was going through the leaks, compiling lists of names and basically trying to make the data more manageable, more accessible. And as we started identifying leads, we were bringing in more and more journalists. We were inducting them. Some had worked with us before, others had not worked with ICIJ before. So we were getting them onboarded onto our secure platforms where the data can be accessed, briefing them on the data and the security protocols around that. And we ended up with a team of 38 journalists across 11 countries. And the leak is the largest of its kind from a financial intelligence unit in Africa. There have been other small leaks, but this was the largest of its kind. And let's talk a bit about the EFIU. The EFIU is the Swazi equivalent of FinCEN in the States, or the Financial Intelligence Center in South Africa. Its role is intelligence gathering. So it's responsible for receiving financial intelligence from reporting institutions, namely financial institutions like banks. So it receives this information. It does so proactively and passively. So banks regularly submit reports on suspicious financial activity, but the EFIU can also request banks and financial institutions to submit intelligence, to submit, say, bank records and so on. And the EFIU then analyzes, it sorts through this information and analyzes it and produces financial intelligence, which it then imparts, it then disseminates that to various authorities, including authorities in the criminal justice system, the revenue authorities, and so on. And it does work with counterpart bodies in the region, like the Financial Intelligence Center in South Africa. And for complex international transactions, it has to do that. In order to find out where the money has come from and where it's going. As you can imagine, the leak contains some very interesting information. These units are typically very, very secretive. So the FIC in South Africa is basically a black hole, an information hole. It's very, very hard to get even basic information from them as a journalist. This photo here is of the EFIU in Eswatini. It's in a nondescript commercial building in a shopping mall. It's not signposted at all. It's just the entrance is this very discreet door behind quite significant security. What do the leaks include? For a lot of bank statements, police reports, court records, a lot of correspondence between the EFIU and counterpart bodies. And then these suspicious transaction reports, which are very useful, that the banks compile, and then the EFIU compiles reports in turn to the authorities. And so you have a lot of information on individuals and entities suspected of being involved in criminal or illicit activity. But there's also a lot of information on the enablers of this sort of thing. So we see, for instance, the banks coming under a lot of criticism from Swazi authorities, law firms and lawyers who help the rich and powerful move money secretively. I'll take you through just very briefly a couple of the sort of highlights. Here we have a special economic zone that was set up by the government. It was promulgated years back and supposedly the brainchild of King Mswati, the last absolute monarch in Africa. Now, it was supposed to attract investment and industry and catapult Eswatini into first world status, as the government put it. In order to build this special economic zone, people living on this land were forcibly evicted. But as you can see from this photograph, it's pretty much a white elephant. There was, when we went there, no sign of industry, no sign of the promised investment, nothing tangible apart from wide open empty roads and vacant lots and this government building that you see in the photograph. But the SEZ, the Special Economic Zone, did prove very useful for two politically connected individuals, both of whom were linked to the king. One of whom came up in Al Jazeera's famous gold mafia investigation. We ended up working with Al Jazeera on this, by the way. The other of whom was is a son-in-law of the king's. And the gold mafia individual, a man named Alistair Matthias, was caught on camera by Al Jazeera boasting about how he's close to politicians and oligarchs around the world and leaders, including King Mswati. Matthias is described by Al Jazeera as an architect of complex financial schemes. And this special economic zone proved very useful for them. It was supposed to attract investors by offering all sorts of incentives like tax breaks. But it also provided all sorts of regulatory loopholes. And the EFIU was alarmed at how these two politically connected individuals were setting up companies in Eswatini and in the Special Economic Zone and moving money very freely and clandestinely from South Africa through Eswatini and off to Dubai. So it flagged these suspicious reports. Ultimately, very little was done, and by the time the authorities sort of had cottoned on to all of this, millions and millions of dollars had moved through these these shell companies. The EFIU used terms like smurfing and layering to describe these complex transactions. It's basically anti-money laundering parlance for ways of obfuscating the money trail. So on to the next slide. This was a story we did on a bank set up by some murky Canadian investors in, of all places, a former asbestos mining town that is now a ghost town. You can see the town on the left, the bank headquarters on the right. Now, the investors were these Canadian brothers. They were part of, they were the sons of a real estate developer in Canada. I mean, it was all somewhat comical because the family were constantly at each other's throats, constantly in litigation. They were highly litigious. And there were these ongoing fights over the inheritance. Anyway, a large portion of money, millions and millions, made its way to South Africa and Eswatini, supposedly to start up this bank. But there were all sorts of red flags around this. In fact, the story was quite a big story before we even began looking into it and looking into the financial flows, because the Central Bank of Eswatini tried to block this bank and raised all sorts of questions about their banking license application. And yet the investors sort of got the green light to establish the bank and to go ahead and start banking. And it seems to have been because there was a significant degree of political interference brought to bear. One of the key people in all of this was a man named Neil Reichenberg. He's on the left there, the finance minister, the kingdom's finance minister, also one of the richest people in Eswatini. He's very closely associated with that town. He, like so many high-level politicians in Eswatini, has a church, and the church basically runs the town. He also came up in several other stories. I mean, his fingerprints were really were quite ubiquitous in the leaks. He was accused, prior to us publishing, he was accused of having hired a security outfit that basically acted as mercenaries and forces of the royal family, and who were said to be torturing and killing activists and clamping down on dissent after the pro-democracy, anti-monarchy protests of 2021. What we did find in the leaks was evidence of one of his companies procuring highly sensitive Israeli spyware for the regime. I'm a little bit mindful of time, so I think I might just skip this slide. I do want to just briefly mention that another prominent name who came up in the leaks was that of Edgar Lungu, the former Zambian president, who is apparently making or has set his sights on a political comeback. He came up in relation to his very wealthy associate, Mikelo Shakantu, who's there on the left. I'm not sure who the guy in the middle is, but the man on the left is Mikelo Shakantu, who's a very wealthy Zambian Swazi businessman. Now, the two of them were the subject of an EFIU report in connection to a questionable property transaction. But Shakantu came up in several reports by the EFIU in connection with millions and millions of dollars of suspicious transactions. Nothing ultimately happened with those investigations. They seem to have hit a dead end. So years later, he's yet to be held to account. And it might have something to do with the fact that his wife is now justice minister, or was justice minister. She was made justice minister. So quickly, some of the challenges and lessons. That the story of Shakantu, I think, points to some of the EFIU's limitations, and therefore some of the limitations in the data. I mean, the EFIU is really only as good as the system around it. Our sense was that it's a statutory body, and it seemed to operate relatively effectively and relatively independently, but its line of sight is quite limited, and its powers of investigations are also quite circumscribed. So it can request financial information from banks and financial institutions, but beyond that, it can't really investigate all that much. It cannot subpoena witnesses. It cannot conduct human intelligence and that sort of thing. And once it hands over its intelligence to the authorities, and that may be great intelligence, that may be very comprehensive, very thorough intelligence, very detailed reports. It's ultimately up to the authorities to investigate and prosecute. And what we saw in the leaks is very often this wasn't the case. Also, the EFIU, as I mentioned earlier, if you're talking about convoluted global transactions that are designed to basically conceal the origins and destination of money, it's very hard for the EFIU operating in a context where, for instance, you have authorities in Dubai that are very, very reluctant to cooperate. Dubai is a notorious secrecy jurisdiction, and is for that reason very attractive to the likes of the so-called gold mafia. So the EFIU very often only just gets snapshots of transactions or of a greater sort of financial scheme, and that's a limitation in the data. We only get those snapshots. We only get to see basically what the EFIU sees, and sometimes, for instance, with the Financial Intelligence Center in South Africa, there was a relatively high degree of cooperation, but nothing from the Dubai authorities. So often the paper trail goes dead, in which case, that really necessitated us going beyond the leaks. And to begin with, we're talking about nearly 1 million documents. This was a project that was too big for any one investigation, for any one media outlet in any case. So we had to be sharing information, but this is especially important, I think, given the limitation of the leaks. They're at the same time very expansive, but also very limited. And we ended up having to do a lot of on-the-ground reporting, and our partners did a lot of on-the-ground reporting from Eswatini to Canada. We got court documents in Canada. We got leaked records in Eswatini. We were also extremely fortunate that one partner who we brought on Open Secrets, we actually got in touch with them at the previous African Investigative Journalism Conference and found out that they were looking at very much the same sort of thing. They didn't have the leaks, but they had a lot of information around Farmers Bank and various other stories we ended up working on that filled in a lot of the gaps. And that was really by chance. And so we brought them into the project, and thanks to that collaboration, we had much fuller stories. Just very briefly, the security situation, people often ask about this. I mean, it is a repressive authoritarian state, even though it, is this very serene, welcoming place. There's a dark underside to it all. And in a collaboration, you're only really as strong as your weakest links. And we had some partners who we'd never worked with before. So, that was very important, was, ensuring that everyone was on the same page in terms of security protocols. We took security very seriously. We did have one or two scares. One group of partners were followed, and we did have to get someone out of Eswatini. But on the whole, things went well. And then for the last point, I just want to speak about the challenge of a big novel investigation where you have so many different partners with very different approaches and backgrounds and expectations and so on. And each investigation, each collaboration is different and comes with its own challenges. This was pretty unique for Southern Africa. Most of our partners had never really been involved in anything like this, or a lot of our partners had, and some had worked with ICIJ before. And I think the key thing there that made this successful was a very high level of trust and transparency, and all of that underpinned by this kind of radical sharing approach. I mean, everyone, all the information was shared, and we were very transparent in how we went about this. And that's the Swazi secrets in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mika. I want to invite Ben on to join us just as we go through the next section with questions. But before we take questions from the audience, I'm going to sneak one or two in just to privilege of mine as moderator. So can I ask, Mika, just starting with you, if you are an individual working on a story like this and you're looking for partners, how do you establish trust? What do you look for? Give me 3 things.
Thankfully, we already had some partners who we'd worked with before. So, they were key to this. So we had a kind of core body of partners. I also happened to know some of the new partners who we'd brought in. AIJC in that sense was very useful, I should say again, in connecting us to people like the Al Jazeera team. What do we look for? I mean, obviously, one sort of stand-up thing is reputation, and it's, as investigative journalists, not that difficult to establish the reputation of a media outlet or a journalist. It's easy enough to kind of ask around and so on. Reputation is important, publishing record and so on. Are you talking more in terms of characteristics or how we go about establishing trust? Sorry, I think you've muted.
How you establish trust. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Are you good on that one? All right, so I'm going to move on a little bit, and let me open this question up to the rest of the colleagues. What strikes me about all of the presentations today is how they operate at a political level, a finance, a very high finance level, a corporate corruption level, and so on and so forth. But all of you have mentioned communities. Can I ask if you think about how your stories are reaching those communities, not just in terms of them as sources, but actually them accessing the stories thereafter? Because I'm sure most of your investigations are entering the mainstream, as it were, and may not necessarily reach those communities as such. I think, Madeleine, if I could start with you on this one, because you touched a little bit on this.
All right, thank you so much for the question. I would say that we really care about reaching the community with the stories. That's why we try to work with local journalists or people who are part of the community as people who will guide us through the reporting. So for the investigation, for example, when we had a chance that it was the main finding were highlighted by the RFE, and RFE is like listen like everywhere, and you can even download or share the link. So we shared the link with one of the person who helped us during the reporting, the local partner who helped us during the reporting. When we published the story, we shared the link of the podcast. So I think he was even the one who contacted me and say, I heard the story on RFE. So it's high. What you mentioned, the story is really strong and so on. I'll say, okay, we heard the story on RFE and we're proud of the story. He shared some feedback on what the community think about. So we try our best. We always try our best to keep in touch with our sources on the ground to share if the story with at least the leader who can report to the other community member. That's what we usually do, because it's really important not only to take the story, because I still remember when I started like the field trip years ago, community were telling me that we have been interviewing many years by many journalists. They are coming here, taking our pictures, taking our. We don't know what they are doing with all this. So there's the trust between us and community, how to build that trust and make sure that after you, another journalist will come and be able to report. It's just to share what you produce with the community so that they know that it's served. Yes, that's what I can say.
Thanks so much, Madeleine. Grace, do you want to weigh in?
Yes, I think it's very important to engage the community in any investigative attempt that you engage in. That's why we use fixers on ground, and also AP collaborates with a lot of broadcasters, and so the story gets to the people and they can see the results of the investigations and know that you're speaking to them and also protecting those that need to be protected, and also you have their best interests at heart. So yes, it's very key.
Yeah, and that helps to build the trust for the next time around. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cynthia, just a quick question to you before I hand over to Benon. I know I'm taking up his time, but just talk to me a little bit about the technical know-how that goes into the work that you're doing, and how much of that is reliant on a broader team. I mean, I'm sure many of our colleagues listening in may think, well, I don't know how to work with this database. I don't know what you mean by data scraping. I don't know this. I don't know that. And so it's impossible for me to do this kind of work. Is that true?
Depending on how your media house is structured, I think it's a yes and no answer because, for example, with Poison PR, I also found it to be a little bit really technical, especially when it came now to these terminologies. A few years ago, I was working on my grandmother's farm, and then boom, a few years later, I hear about pesticides like paraquat, and it starts dawning on me, by the way, it's long since I've had grandma asking us to go and help with the weeding at home. So I remember at some point I had to ask my fellow collaborators to give me at least 3 weeks to go through all the documents, to read and understand. I also, one of our interviewees in the story is an expert on these issues of agriculture. So before I even went to interview her, I sat her down first for her to explain to me what these what are these pesticides? What are these, you call them main ingredients? I also had to go through the Route to Food Initiative report and did a lot of research. And now when it comes now to the other issues like data scrapping, representation of this data, I heavily relied on our fact-checking desk, which is well trained on these issues. And I also relied on the team from Lighthouse Reports because I'm sure my colleagues can relate. When it comes to dealing with farmers, it's really hectic. You go through a lot of cancellation of interviews because most of them are scared. If they talk negatively about the government and some of these pesticide promoters, it's going to work to their disadvantage. So for me, I leveraged on this collaboration. Particularly, I leveraged on the skills that each collaborator was coming on board with, and even relied also heavily on the support from the team at Africa Uncensored. Yeah.
Fantastic. And I can say that GIJ makes many of those tools, free tools, resources, and gives you access to a network of people that you can leverage off. Let me bring Maxime in. Sorry, not Maxime, Benon. I'm looking at Maxime's name. Benon, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Dinesh. There are lots of questions, so I'll dive right in. There is the first one for Grace. Could you talk about how you came across the first fact that raised the red flag for you, the explosion in the number of fishing boats with Cameroonian flags, and how your intuition guided you to do the research to support your hunch? Grace?
Thank you very much for the question. So it wasn't a hunch per se. The EU Commission issued Cameroon a yellow card. This was in 2021, and they basically warned the nation that they needed to step up their actions against illegal fishing. And now that report is actually linked in our story. In that report, they named several vessels that we are fishing in Cameroon, and they forgot to, they left out some names, and then we decided to dig deeper. My colleague Risha, who's very used to tracking vessels on marine traffic, she was able to, look. She noticed the suspicious activities and, started to research further from that report. So it was through that report then that we started finding other vessels that were linked to EU member states. And yeah, so that was just basically from that report by the EU Commission issuing Cameroon a yellow card. That was what spurred our interest in the story and then led us to further research. So yeah, it wasn't just a hunch. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The second question goes to Madeline and Cynthia. Either of you could answer it. How do you deal with local sources, especially when they know you're working or collaborating with European or Western partners? did you experience a situation where your sources, that is to say local NGOs, for example, expected you to do something for them in return? For instance, help get funds to further their advocacy. Was that a challenge you faced? Cynthia?
That was not really a challenge I faced from the NGOs that we engaged in the story. In fact, on the contrary, we will be working together now post-production. We'll be working together for in community screenings at the community level, at the grassroots level. So what I have done, these organizations have mobilized farmers in the grassroots, and I have translated the story to Swahili. So beginning next week, we'll be doing these screenings in the villages. But I did come across a request, especially when it now came to accessing medical assistance for the characters in the story. That is something that borders along so many issues, and that I let now my organization handle, also with some of the collaborators to try and see whether we can engage organizations that deal in Parkinson's disease and Parkinson's disease support groups to be able to assist some of these victims. Because also another challenge in Kenya is that Parkinson's disease hasn't really received the kind of kind of attention in the health sector. So we are yet to see structured, structured planning in terms of knowing how to handle people who, present with these symptoms in Kenya.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. Let me bring in Madeline to respond to a question about funding for collaborative investigations. Are there opportunities to fund investigative collaborations? How have you dealt with getting those opportunities yourself? And from where you sit now, what opportunities exist that investigative journalists on the continent can take advantage of? Madeline?
Yes, thank you so much for this opportunity, Benon. I would say that I think many years ago, like a few years ago, I would say it was a bit hard for journalists based in Africa to say, in Francophone Africa, for example, to say we can have a grant to do investigation and do in-depth stories, but things have changed a lot. We have organizations such as JJN sharing the resources, so how to like look for stories, idea, but we have a lot of organizations sharing, proposing grants opportunity to journalists to cover environmental stories, land grabbing stories, human rights stories. So there are a lot of grant opportunities available for journalists who cover story in Africa. And I would say that now, as journalists based in Africa, I would suggest that don't consider that your story is just for people in Africa, because your story is connected to something that is out of Africa. You are not just alone. So many organizations find reports that are in Africa and that are also connected to international market. I will just use the opportunity to share that at the Police Center, for example, we have a lot of grants available for journalists in Africa who want to do in-depth stories. The Rainforest Investigation Network, we just launched a call for the 5th year. So is that the program that I had a chance to be part of when I started the long form investigation? So the call for application is still now running till the end of December. There are a lot of ongoing grants opportunity available, not only from us, but for many other organizations. I think that's, I would say, like I usually say with colleagues, that is the moment for journalists working on Africa or working in Africa to get opportunity to do strong work, because there is a lot of funding opportunity available out there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I should add that the GIJN funding and resources page has a lot of such opportunities as well. So if you can check out the GIJN grants and fellowships page, you should be able to get some of those. The next question, I'll put it to Mika. How do we collaborate when we don't really have any experience in investigative journalism? Is it up to us to reach out to the media and the investigative journalists who are there, or is it up to them to reach out to us? That's a question for you, Mika.
It's a bit of both, I suppose. You know, when we work with new partners, obviously, as I said previously, we do our due diligence and we get to know them. We don't just sort of, don't tend to throw them into the deep end. And usually we will look for, people we trust. We'll build relationships with them, but also those that have a level of competency. Not just in terms of how you find information and those kind of those sorts of investigative hard skills, but also how you handle security, etc. But a lot of these things, I think, people get journalists who haven't done kind of big, complex, follow the money investigations get put off at the idea of of doing them because they sound so confusing and so difficult and so intricate. But very often, I think, when we work with new partners, we find that journalists, even if they lack investigative experience, they have a level of sort of intuition and general journalism experience that can be applied to investigations. They're often more able to do investigations than they realize, and they're applying those sort of journalistic skills in their day-to-day work. Not all of these things are infinitely complex. And when we work with new partners, there is a level of training in how we provide training workshops in how to analyze data and financial flows, how to use our platforms, how to search through millions and millions of documents and find what you're looking for. And security as well. I mean, during Swazi Secrets, I traveled to partners in the region to help them with things like encryption, to get them set up so that they could communicate securely and that kind of thing. So I would say, don't be put off. And there are a lot of training opportunities out there outside of these investigations. The investigations themselves, our collaborative projects, offer an opportunity to build and develop skills. But outside of them, there are various organizations, providing those sorts of things, providing training workshops, and so on.
Thank you, Mika. I think the final question here will go to Grace. A lot of investigative journalists in Africa have found difficulty in getting to collaborate with the journalists in mainstream US media organizations. You work with AP and you've done some collaborative investigations. What tips would you have for investigative journalists on the continent who are keen to collaborate with media organizations in the US?
Thanks for the question. So the difficulties reaching out to the journalists, or those
collaborating with media organizations, especially getting collaborative investigations into US media. It's much easier to do it with the European media organizations, but in the US, I think there's some kind of code that we haven't cracked. Maybe you have cracked it and you'll be able to share it with us here.
Well, I do not have details on what's underlined, but it's pretty simple. For my team, we do a lot of collaborations with investigative journalists everywhere. We're actually calling for more collaborators to help us in our oceans investigations, oceans and fisheries investigations. So please do get in touch. You can email me your pitch or just a few words, and then we can have a meeting and talk about it if it's oceans related. I think it depends on the organization if they want to collaborate or but I haven't, like for AP, we do a lot of collaborations, and just if you can just send an email to any journalist or any editor you think you'd like to pitch your story to, and have a conversation with them. And I think if it's good and they're interested in it, they would pick it up. It's just a simple.
Great, thank you. There is a question from Sunny who says, can you help us with a sample of an investigative story pitch for starters like us to pitch? And you talked about training. Mika, he asks, do you have courses and certificates for starters like us? Are you able, Mika, to maybe outline the important aspects of a story pitch that somebody could share, or somebody can pitch to an organization if they have a story idea?
Sure. So, I mean, we don't have kind of a template pitch, and you know, it does vary from organization to organization. But I think, you know, what's very important is, and it's difficult when it's an investigative pitch, but is brevity. You want to be concise and clear. You want to outline the angle. So, you know, right at the get-go, be clear about what you want to uncover, why this matters, how you're going to go about it. So what sort of evidence is available? Try to show that you've already done some groundwork, that you have researched the subject, that you have perhaps spoken to some sources about it, that you've done some kind of planning. Perhaps you've read up on it. Try to demonstrate that so that you can show to some degree that this is a feasible project. And then so then you want to outline, you know, how you will go about getting that information, what sort of sources are available, what open source material is available. And, you know, ideally you want to be able to give life to your story, bring characters in. Generally, what we're doing at investigative journalism is exposing some or other wrongdoing or abuse, and who are the victims of this. You also want to try and get that across in a pitch, generally speaking. But, you know, different outlets will have different requirements. Some may want much more detailed pitches with budget outlines and so forth. I would say, you know, there's no harm trying to knock on an editor's door. If you have story ideas, try, you know, get hold of an editor's contact details, and be a little persistent. I mean, as journalists, we're used to making nuisances of ourselves. So, you know, don't be worried about pestering editors sometimes. And try, you know, if you get rejected the first time, try again. There are a lot of news outlets, a lot of media organizations hungry for pitches, hungry for stories. And, you know, a lot of us have open door policies. So if you need some advice or whatever, yeah, take us up for a coffee or give us a call.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your thoughtful answers to the audience questions. I'm also happy that a number of the posts in the Q&A box are actually journalists from different parts of the world asking for opportunities to collaborate with the colleagues in Africa. If you want to collaborate with someone in Africa, please reach out to GIJN at hello .org, and we'll try to link you up with somebody from somewhere within the continent who you would want to collaborate with. Otherwise, thank you everyone for participating, and I'll now hand back to Dinesh. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Benon. We have a flurry of questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. In addition to all of the kind of conventional funding, please bear in mind also that there are reporting grants. I know our center, for example, puts out at least a call for about 50 grants a year for individuals to conduct their reporting across this continent. So please look out for those. We are not the only ones who do that. We have run out of time. I'm so sorry to end this conversation. We could have gone on for another hour or so, but sincere thanks to all my colleagues at the Global Investigative Journalism Network and our audience, everyone who tuned in. I was trying to figure out where people were coming from. I could see Nepal, for example, and India. So very welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. And of course, to our speakers, you guys have been amazing. Mika, Madeleine, Cynthia, and Grace, thank you so much. I hope that we will get to showcase new work at AIJC next year. And then finally, just to remind everyone that GIJN's Twitter feed or Twitter handle is @GIJN. The Center for Journalism can be found on LinkedIn, and both organizations share details on future events, training, funding, and networking. But to sign off, thank you so much for joining us, and goodbye, and enjoy the afternoon, evening, or the day. Thank you so much.